So every time we talk about Israel, I have geniuses telling me, Israel is a startup nation, Israel is this, Israel is that. Then you're missing the point of being Israel. The success of that state lies in being able to retain its Jewish identity despite hundreds of UN resolutions against it every year. Even Sudan does not have as many resolutions against it passed by the United Nations as Israel has. Imagine. If you look at the history of the number of UN resolutions being passed against Israel, it's astounding. What is it that the country has done to merit these kind of... Pakistan doesn't get so many resolutions. Zimbabwe doesn't. No country which is being run by drug lords gets these kind of resolutions. But Israel gets it. The only possible democracy in that volatile region, which has adopted for itself a religious identity and still promises equality to everybody else. 8.5 million people in that particular country, 2.5 million Arabs, they enjoy equal rights as the Jews in that particular country. And still people have a problem with that state because they have a problem with the Jewish identity. That is the same issue with us. Nothing that you do which is right will ever be lauded or you will be given credit for because they have a problem with that identity. If this is fear-mongering, so be it. I don't care a damn about making this statement because I know what I'm talking about. This is a fact. Somebody has to say it, I'll say it. So start taking a position about protecting your fundamental identity. I think the fundamental problem that we have had in a very long time, and I say this partly from my understanding of history as a student of history, not even remotely an expert, I'm not a trained historian or a trained student of history, just a normal student of history, a lay student of history. And my understanding of how, let's say, legal systems work and constitutional systems work is we have always approached modern India through the prism of a European nation state.
Sure.
If you look at a European nation, it's either race or language that largely defines its identity. You will not do justice to the idea of India either using language or race. It's going to be impossible to use either of these two metrics to try and define and basket this particular creature, this Jantu. One, because you cannot call any single country of the European Union as we know it today, and you cannot raise it to the level of a civilization. But you can do that as far as India is concerned. Why? Because civilization at the end of the day reflects longevity in a certain journey of that particular culture. The fact that it has managed to encompass within itself multiple identities and subgroups, all having a common strand. Common strand not just for the outsider, but also from within. Which means there is something called Bharatiyata that connects us from the top to bottom, from the left to right, as far as our internal understanding of who we are is concerned, and also as far as the outsider is concerned, because an identity is not just about how you see yourself, but also how the world sees you. Both these matter. Therefore, what does this mean? If India is a civilization, would it be fair to reduce this mammoth concept, this behemoth concept, to the idea of a nation state, and particularly by the word Hinduism? I wouldn't use the word Hinduism one bit at all. Because when you use the word Hinduism, we make the common mistake of actually giving it the status of a religion as opposed to giving it an ethnic identity and perhaps an ethno-religious identity, the way Judaism is treated to a significant extent. You can have an atheist Jew, a secular Jew. Similarly, you can have an atheist Hindu, a secular Hindu. And there would still be no conflict between your profession as a Hindu and your identity as a Hindu and your belief or lack of belief in a deity. There would be no conflict at all. Because you're perfectly capable of encompassing within that particular definition the concept of a Charvaka, a Nirishwarvadi, someone who is perfectly comfortable with profession of atheism or even anti-theism and still does not have a problem with his culture, doesn't loathe his identity. Today the fundamental problem is that this so-called esoteric civilization has been molded in the Abrahamic mold, as a consequence of which Dharma has become the Hindu equivalent of mazhab.
Yes.
And that is where the problem lies. But let me address something more fundamental. For an 18-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old, why should all of this matter? How does it make a difference to someone at that particular age when all they're concerned about is peer acceptance, peer pressure, being part of a larger group, their immediate necessities and nothing beyond? Why should it make a difference at all in the first place? If tomorrow your children here who would perhaps fall within what is disparagingly and pejoratively known as ABCD, right? If they fall within that particular basket and they ask you this simple question, why should I put faith in this particular faith system the way you have? How do I benefit from it? What is wrong if I fully assimilate with the culture of this particular land and I move completely away from your roots because they are not my roots? How do you answer that question? How do you answer that question? You can't give all the esoteric nonsense that I just spouted. It's not going to help. They'll say you don't have an answer, so get lost.
You are still part of that community. You are still...
Therefore,
they
don't see themselves as part of the community at all anymore in their headspace.
You have to start them out from a very young age.
Even if you start them out from a very young age, can you cocoon them and protect them from the influence of the outside world? Is there no example that you can think of where somebody has got a dharmic upbringing and has gone completely adharmic after 18 or 20? Of course possible. There are so many Carnatic singers that we can name. Right?
As long as you treat the identity with the religion, you're never going to be able to address it.
Exactly. Fair enough.
You have to address it.
Right.
Not as a Hindu.
Right.
But as a culture.
Therefore, what do you do?
Therefore, what you do is, I think the best thing to do, or the way you explain it, is this is a way of life, it's not a religion. And if you talk about way of life, then the difference between, if you say a culture, between their culture and my culture, reduces, thereby the acceptance of staying within my culture doesn't have a conflict with their culture.
So that even facilitates conversion.
It
right? Because effectively, according to you, if there is no rigid boundary that separates you from somebody else and yours is not a religion in the sense that the Abrahamics understand it and it is a way of life,
yes,
you have laid down the foundation and the path for conversion. Because that's what is happening all over the world as far as Hindus are concerned.
See, here, and I have the discussion with other people about conversion.
Yes.
And people converting. We have been, if you look at the, or at least the history that is taught to us, right? Indian culture or the Indian subcontinent has been raided by different cultures, different people coming in. And they, in the end, they are the ones who got assimilated. We never assimilated. We never got destroyed. That Hindu...
Thank you for making that point. It's a very important point. Pardon me for saying this. This is the bubble that I want to bust. Pardon me for saying this. Because a significant number of people in this country and elsewhere in the diaspora as well as in India continue to labor under the illusion that since we have survived all the onslaught in every manner possible, we must have done something right. And therefore we must continue making the same mistake because that mistake has kept us alive.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to that particular notion for a very good reason. Because if you look at history, of course there's a march of history, there's a march of time, and there's only precious little that you can do to prevent that particular march. But the fact remains that your space or the space for your identity has shrunk with time. And perhaps irreversibly and perhaps irreparably.
Yes, very right.
And with some hope that this generation will put up a semblance of resistance to reverse that particular damage. Let's see what happens. But be that as it may, while geography is no proof of your power or your presence, it is certainly an indicator of how you have fared with time. And the fact remains that you have shrunk to what is known as the modern secular constitutional Republic of India, and you're shrinking even further from within. That is a fact. Apart from the fact that if we thought at one point of time, why should I get into this nonsense, let me run away to greener pastures and that in this particular part of this particular country, the controversy that happened 3 years ago with textbooks proved to you that they will continue to hound you even here. And there is not a single place in earth that you can hope to reside in and hope to avoid all these problems, because even if you choose to leave your identity cannot leave you, and they will continue to foist that identity on you. So I'll give you an example. I'll just finish this. Can we take this up in Q&A? Let me just make these points. Yeah, because it's just that there's a time, but I'm happy to take your questions. I will not run away from the worst of questions or the best of questions. Okay? So there's a party in Israel which is called the Yeshatit party, and which is now decided to become part of the blue and white coalition in Israel. Why is it relevant? If anybody has read the history of Zionism and the circumstances surrounding the creation of Israel, Zionism was largely created as a consequence of their belief that the old Jew was weak, was a coward, and did not have what it takes to protect their children and women, and therefore they decided to craft for themselves a new identity called the New Jew. The New Jew was supposed to be secular. The New Jew was meant to create a Jewish state. Look at the contradictions. He was a secular Jew who wanted to create a natural homeland for Jews, and he would quote traditional Jewish literature and still spew venom on it. And he would be the one to establish the state of Israel, and that would be the ideology that would govern Israel from 1948 to 1977, approximately the same amount of time that the Congress Party ruled India from 1947 to 1977 until the Janata Party came into being. So that was their version of left of center politics. To the extent that the new secular Jew was militant about not professing your faith in public. To the extent that the new secular Jew would believe that the only way for Judaism to succeed and survive in the face of onslaught from the rest of the communities was for it to abandon its past. Our journey has not been too different. What has changed over the years is that the new generation, which is far removed from the generation that established the state of Israel, has decided to go back to the original Jewish literature. And these are the people who set up this party called the Yeshatit party. So the person who set it up, his name is Yair Lapid. His father, Tommy Lapid, was on a television show with another panelist who was an ultra-Orthodox Jew. And he ended up making the statement that I don't believe in God. This was the statement made by the father of the founder of this party. To which the ultra-Orthodox Jew ends up asking him this question: if you don't believe in God, by what definition are you a Jew? Who made you a Jew? He gave an answer which is extremely telling. Hitler saw a Jew in me. Yeah. Your faith in your tradition, or lack of it, does not prevent the outsider from seeing that identity in you. Because he continues to see that as an infestation or a contamination that needs to be exterminated. So you can run away from your identity all you want, but there is no way you can abandon it. Because that is a two-way process, and it comes with your birth. There is no way you can abandon it. You can try and be deracinated as much as you want, but that identity will be foisted on you by the rest of the community and the rest of the world.
Very good.
The answer to your child that you give in this part of the country, and I don't have a solution, I'm just spitballing here and just throwing a couple of options perhaps, is perhaps you can start with, as you rightly said, to some extent I agree with you, by distinguishing your fundamental approach to religion or dharma, and explain the concept of dharma in the simplest of ways possible, and distinguish it from blind faith in a book or a deity. That, according to me, is the fundamental distinction, which could perhaps resonate in this rational scientific country. And by explaining that you do not have to try and test your religion on the anvils of science, or on the anvils of justice, or on the anvils of equality, because this very faith system is built on that particular foundation. You start with that. And you also start with, and particularly because you happen to live in this state, it is perhaps the one open architecture that celebrates, encourages and facilitates and allows diversity. No standard issue products, no mass production at all. There is no cutting the head across the board to fit the hat. This is something that you can impress upon your children. language is important, and I think we have to start teaching our mother tongues, notwithstanding the fact that they may have to interact with the rest of the world in another language. But this is something that you have to start with. But how is this important? Why is this important? So, if I happen to be in the position of the Indian government, I have a legitimate interest in using the Indian diaspora, the Indic diaspora, to further India's interests. Okay? Because there is a certain amount of soft power, there is a certain amount of networking, there is a certain amount of pull, therefore it comes handy when it comes to foreign policy, trade issues and whatnot. But what is your interest in reciprocating? Why should you take an interest in something that happens in India? If you have chosen to make this particular country your home for the future, what is your incentive? What is your angle? What is your cut in this pie? Why should you take an interest?
You want us to answer?
No, I will answer. Or at least I hope to answer. This is the very same question that Israeli Jews are facing with American Jews. It's the very same issue. The tussle that's been going on between these two representatives of the Jewish community is who is the true voice of the Jewish community? Who can claim to be the guardian of the Hindu voice? Should it be the state which has established itself as a Jewish state? Or should it be the diaspora which has existed even before the establishment of the Jewish state? And which has helped the establishment of the Jewish state? That's the question. So every year these people have a visit to the land of birth where they facilitate the visit of Jewish children from America to Israel. So that is their Tirth Yatra.
It's a birthright.
Right. Do you think it's actually helping?
No.
No, I don't think so. Because if you look at the public discourse, the foremost voices which stand up against the state of Israel, its legitimacy and its policy are Jewish voices. Because their identities have been weaponized to be used against the state of Israel. So you should not fear a non-Hindu voice that speaks out against you, because that has become predictable, that is expected. After 1400 years or since 1 BC or 1 CE, that is to be expected. However, the problem that you actually have is your own people using their own identities or allowing themselves to be used to attack you. That is the problem. We were perfectly comfortable with opposition coming from non-Hindus with respect to our position in Sabarimala, and we could tell them, you have no dog in this race, you have no skin in this game, so get out, it's not your business. We also had enough number of people from non-Hindu communities supporting our position because they understood what we were standing for. But the worst of opposition and the most scathing of criticism came from educated, let me use the word, Savarna girls. Upper caste Hindu girls, if I were to use the politically incorrect term, because they were the ones to stand up and say, we will not apologize for this particular tradition, this is superstition, and they decided to use their identity as a Hindu and their gender as women to attack this particular tradition. How do you respond to that? Because then effectively, the opposition from the other side is going to sit and laugh with a popcorn in hand because you guys are fighting with him. And they've had nothing to do. They don't need to do anything because somebody else is doing the talking for them. That is the danger. Second, there is a significant amount of chance that deracination, when they grow up here as part of the diaspora, is a consequence of, as Sir rightly pointed out, the negative stereotypes about India and its culture. Therefore, at the very least, if you have an interest in protecting your child from being exposed to that kind of slander and libel, you have no other option but to work along with the motherland to address this particular issue. There is your selfish motive and there is your incentive to take an interest in what happens there. I can't think of any other legitimate incentive or real-time incentive for you to actually take a concrete interest, because I think gone are the times when you can actually ask people to believe in something because it's right or it's the right thing to do. That is the dharmic way of going about it, but we are living in the age of IPR, so I need to give an incentive for the quid pro quo to actually work. So the quid pro quo is this. If you take your identity seriously and you want to pass on that identity to your child, you have no other option but to take part in the active politics of that particular country, which is not a politics for resources, which is not a politics about economics, which is not a politics about supremacy of any other kind except cultural and religious supremacy. That is a fact. It is an identity-oriented issue. That is something that you cannot run away from.